She sold her wedding to save her brother, but the love they bought came back to ask for forgiveness. The rain fell like tears the sky refused to keep. Isabella stood at the altar in a dress borrowed from a stranger, her hands trembling not from cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Beside her, Richard Blake, tall, stoic, untouchable, stared ahead, as if attending a funeral instead of a wedding. The priest's voice echoed through the empty chapel, "Until death do you part." Isabella's mind whispered back, "Death is the only thing that could separate what was never joined." Behind the stained glass, through iron bars and concrete walls, her brother Daniel watched from a prison cell via a screen someone had mercy enough to provide. His face was hollow, carved by guilt he didn't deserve and crimes he didn't commit. The rings exchanged were cold. No kiss sealed the vow, just a signature on paper, black ink on white lies. As they walked down the aisle, Richard didn't take her hand. He simply said, "Your brother will be free by morning." And Isabella understood. She had just sold her soul to save the only family she had left. The doors closed behind them. The rain continued to fall. 3 weeks earlier, Isabella Costa was a woman who believed in simple truths, hard work, honesty, and that good people eventually won. She taught literature at a community school, helped elderly neighbors carry groceries, and every Sunday she visited Daniel, the younger brother she had raised after their parents died in a car accident when she was 19. Daniel was brilliant, an accountant with a future, until the day Richard Blake's company accused him of embezzlement, fraud, and corporate espionage. The evidence was fabricated. The lawyers were bought. The judge was impatient. Daniel faced 15 years. Isabella spent every penny she had, sold her mother's jewelry, begged every lawyer in the city. None would touch a case against Richard Blake, the man who owned half the skyline and the other half of people's fear, until Richard himself appeared at her door. Tall, impeccably dressed, eyes like frozen lakes. He made an offer that sounded like mercy, but tasted like poison. "Marry me. Play the role. 3 years. When the contract ends, your brother walks free, and you get your life back." She asked why. He answered with silence, and silence, she would learn, was Richard Blake's native language. She signed the paper that night. The wedding night was colder than the ceremony. Richard's estate loomed like a monument to loneliness. White marble, glass walls, and rooms so vast that footsteps echoed like ghosts. Isabella was led to her quarters by a housekeeper who wouldn't meet her eyes, as if shame were contagious. The room was beautiful, lifeless, but beautiful. Her bed large enough to drown in, silk sheets that smelled of lavender and detachment, a window overlooking gardens she wasn't sure she was allowed to walk through. Richard appeared in the doorway an hour later, still in his suit, tie loosened but not removed. "You'll have everything you need," he said without preamble. "Meals are at 8, 1, and 7. You're free to move through the house, but the east wing is off limits. My assistant will arrange anything you require." Isabella stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself. "And what do you require?" "Silence," he replied. "I don't need a wife. I need an arrangement." "Then why marry at all?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered behind those frozen eyes, something almost human, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "That's not your concern." He turned to leave. "Richard." He stopped but didn't turn around. "My brother. When will I see him?" "Tomorrow. He'll be released at dawn. A car will bring him here if you wish." "I wish?" He nodded once and disappeared into the shadows of the corridor. Isabella sank onto the bed, still in her borrowed dress, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in the city, Daniel was sleeping in a cell for the last time. That thought, just that, made the cage around her heart feel a little less tight. She whispered into the darkness, "I'll survive this. I have to." But survival, she would learn, was a different kind of death. The next morning, Daniel arrived in a black car with tinted windows. Isabella ran to him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like herself. Messy, emotional, alive. They held each other in the driveway while Richard watched from a window above, his face unreadable. "Isa, what did you do?" Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I did what I had to. He's dangerous. Everyone knows he's powerful. That's not the same thing." Daniel pulled back, studying her face. "You can't stay here. We'll find another way." "There is no other way. I signed a contract." "Contracts can be broken." She smiled, sad and distant. "Not this one. It's written in something heavier than ink." Daniel's eyes filled with fury and helplessness. 3 years? 3 years? And then I get my life back. But even as she said it, she wondered if a life could ever be returned once it had been sold. That night, Isabella ate dinner alone. The dining room was enormous, the table long enough to seat 20. She sat at one end with a plate of food she couldn't taste. Across the room, barely visible in the dim light, Richard sat at the other end. Neither spoke. The only sound was silverware against porcelain, a rhythm as cold as a metronome counting down to nothing. After 30 minutes, Richard stood and left without a word. Isabella stared at his empty chair and thought, "This is my life now. A house full of everything and nothing at all." She returned to her room and found a note slipped under the door. "Your brother has been given a job and an apartment. He'll want for nothing." That was the agreement. No signature, no warmth. Just facts, like everything else in Richard Blake's world. Isabella folded the note and placed it in a drawer. Then she sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the gardens she still hadn't walked through. Somewhere in the house a piano played, a haunting, lonely melody that seemed to carry the weight of 100 unspoken words. She wondered if Richard was the one playing. She wondered if he even knew how to feel. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Isabella learned the rhythms of her prison. Breakfast at 8, silence until 1, dinner at 7, more silence until sleep. She was surrounded by luxury, marble floors, fresh flowers delivered daily, a wardrobe filled with clothes she never chose. But luxury, she discovered, was just poverty dressed in silk. Richard controlled everything. When she woke, what she wore, where she went. He never raised his voice, never touched her, never even looked at her for more than a few seconds. But his presence was everywhere, watching, measuring, ensuring she stayed within the invisible lines he had drawn around her life. One morning, Isabella decided to break the silence. She found him in his study, surrounded by papers and screens, the cold light of ambition reflecting in his eyes. "I want to go back to teaching," she said from the doorway. He didn't look up. "No, I wasn't asking for permission." Now he looked up. His gaze was sharp, clinical. "You were. You just didn't realize it. Richard, I'm going insane in this house. You're safe. You're provided for." That was the agreement. The agreement was marriage, not imprisonment. He set down his pen with deliberate care. "Is there a difference?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Isabella stepped into the room, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I kept my word. I wear the ring, I sit at your table, I play the role, but you can't ask me to stop being human." Richard stood, moving to the window with his back to her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "I'm not asking you to stop being human, I'm asking you to stop expecting me to be." The words struck her like a slap. She left without another word. That night she ate alone again, but this time halfway through the meal, Richard appeared. He didn't sit. He simply stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "You don't eat properly," he said. Isabella looked up, fork frozen mid-air. "And you don't speak properly." A pause. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something. "Touché." He turned to leave, but Isabella's voice stopped him. "Why did you marry me, Richard?" He didn't turn around. "Because I needed to." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." And then he was gone, leaving Isabella alone with the ghost of a conversation that almost felt real. Weeks passed. Richard began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started eating dinner at the same time as her, still at the opposite end of the table but present. He asked if she needed anything, not through assistance, directly. He noticed when she seemed sad and, in his awkward, broken way, tried to fix it. One evening she found a stack of books on her bed, classics she had mentioned loving during one of their sparse conversations. No note, no explanation, just books. Isabella held them and, for the first time in months, felt something other than numbness. Then came the night that changed everything. Isabella woke to the sound of piano music drifting through the halls. It was 2 a.m. Drawn by curiosity and insomnia, she followed the sound to a room she had never entered. The east wing Richard had forbidden. The door was ajar. Inside, bathed in moonlight, Richard sat at a grand piano, his fingers moving over the keys with a tenderness she didn't know he possessed. The melody was heartbreaking, lonely, desperate. Isabella stood in the doorway, barely breathing, watching this man who had shown her nothing but ice now pour his soul into music. When the last note faded, Richard spoke without turning around. "I knew you were there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine." He finally looked at her, and in the low light, His eyes seemed different, human. I play when I can't sleep. It's beautiful. It's all I have left. The admission hung between them, fragile and raw. Isabella stepped into the room. Left of what? Richard's hands hovered over the keys. Of the person I used to be, before I learned that everything, and everyone, has a price. Not everyone. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted. You're proof that I'm wrong, aren't you? Isabella didn't know how to answer that, so she simply sat beside him on the piano bench and said, "Play something else." And he did. For the first time since the wedding, they shared the same space without walls between them. It wasn't love, but it was the beginning of something that might, one day, learn to be. Daniel was drowning in freedom. The apartment Richard had provided was clean, modern, and soulless. The job, accounting for a subsidiary company, paid well, but felt like charity wrapped in corporate language. Every morning, Daniel woke up and looked at himself in the mirror, searching for the man he used to be, the one who believed in justice, the one who thought honesty mattered. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who had been saved by his sister's sacrifice and couldn't forgive himself for it. He tried calling Isabella. She always sounded fine, too fine. "I'm okay, Daniel, really." "You're lying." "I'm surviving." "Isn't that what you wanted?" The conversations always ended the same way, with silence and guilt thick enough to choke on. One evening, Daniel received an envelope. No return address, no name. Inside was a single document, a contract between Richard Blake and a shell corporation, dated 2 months before Daniel's arrest. His hands shook as he read. It was a setup. Richard hadn't just framed him. He had orchestrated the entire thing, hired someone to plant evidence, paid off witnesses, manipulated audits, all to create leverage. But leverage for what? Daniel dug deeper, and what he found made his blood run cold. Richard Blake had needed a wife. Not for love, not for appearances, for inheritance. His grandfather's will had a clause. Richard could only access the full family fortune if he was married by his 35th birthday. That birthday had been 4 weeks after Daniel's arrest. Isabella hadn't saved her brother. She had saved Richard's empire. Daniel showed up at the estate the next day, fury blazing in his eyes. The housekeeper tried to stop him, but he pushed past, storming through hallways until he found Isabella in the garden, tending to roses that seemed too perfect to be real. "Isa!" She turned, startled. "Daniel, what are you—" "He lied to you," she frowned. "What?" Daniel shoved the documents into her hands. "Read it. All of it. The arrest, the charges, everything was fake. He set me up so you'd have no choice but to marry him." Isabella's face went pale as she read. Her hands trembled. Her breath came in short, painful gasps. No, this can't— It's real, Isa. You didn't save me. You saved him." The roses fell from her hands. That night, Isabella confronted Richard. She found him in his study, exactly where she knew he'd be, surrounded by the empire built on lies. She threw the documents on his desk. "Explain this." Richard looked at the papers, then at her, his expression unreadable. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" "Yes, my brother found them. The truth you buried." Richard leaned back in his chair, silent. "You framed him," Isabella continued, her voice shaking. "You orchestrated everything, the arrest, the charges. You made me believe I was saving him when all I was doing was saving you." "Yes." The admission was so simple, so devoid of remorse that it stole her breath. "That's it? Just yes?" Richard stood, moving to the window. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I regret it? I want you to feel something." He turned, and for the first time she saw anger in his eyes. "I feel plenty, Isabella. I just don't let it control me like you do. You bought a marriage with lies. I bought a solution to a problem. I'm not a solution, I'm a person." Richard's jaw clenched. "And your brother is free. Your debt is paid. The contract ends in 2 years. What more do you want?" Isabella stepped closer, her eyes burning. "I want you to understand something, Richard. You can buy signatures and silence and even time. But love?" She shook her head. "Love doesn't accept receipts." She turned and walked away, leaving Richard alone in his empire of glass and lies. That night Isabella didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the gardens she had tried to make beautiful, and realized she had been tending to a prison, not a home. For the first time since the wedding, she allowed herself to cry, not for what she had lost, but for what she had never had the chance to find. The next morning, she began planning her escape. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. She stopped trying to make conversation at dinner, stopped tending the gardens, stopped pretending that any of this was real. Richard noticed. Of course he noticed, but he said nothing. And in that silence, the distance between them grew into a chasm neither knew how to cross. Richard Blake had always believed in control. Control was predictable, safe. It didn't betray you or leave you bleeding in the dark. But Isabella Costa was teaching him something terrifying. Control was just another word for loneliness. He watched her from windows and doorways, observed the way she moved through his house like a ghost, no longer trying to make it a home. He noticed when she stopped smiling at the staff, when she stopped reading in the garden, when she stopped playing the piano he had moved into the main hall hoping she might use it. She was disappearing right in front of him, and for the first time in his life, Richard Blake didn't know how to fix something that money couldn't buy. One afternoon he found her in the library, staring at a book she wasn't reading. Isabella. She didn't look up. Richard. He stood in the doorway, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his own home. He stopped, started again. I wanted to what? Say sorry. Say something. Say anything that might bridge the ocean between us. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, would you like to go outside? She finally looked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. Outside? The estate? The grounds? You've been inside too much. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he could come to admitting he had caged her. Isabella closed the book. Why? Because you look like you're suffocating. The honesty surprised them both. After a long moment, she nodded. All right. They walked through gardens Isabella had only ever seen from windows. Richard kept his hands in his pockets, maintaining careful distance, while she moved from flower to flower like someone relearning what beauty felt like. Did you plant these? She asked. My mother did. Before she died. Isabella glanced at him. You've never mentioned her. There's not much to say. She was gentle, kind, everything my father wasn't. He paused by a rose bush, touching a bloom with surprising tenderness. She taught me piano. Said music was the only honest language. She sounds wonderful. She was. Until my father broke her. The words came out flat, factual. But Isabella heard the wound beneath them. Is that why you don't let people close? She asked quietly. Richard's hand dropped from the rose. I let people close once, it didn't end well. So you decided to control everything instead. Control is simpler. Control is lonelier. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something cracked in his carefully constructed walls. Yes, it is. They continued walking in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Less empty, more shared. Days passed. Richard started trying, awkwardly, painfully, but trying. He asked about her day, actually listened to the answer. He stopped eating at the opposite end of the table and moved closer, not next to her, but closer. One evening, he brought her flowers, white lilies from the garden his mother had planted. He held them out like someone offering a grenade, unsure if it would explode. I don't know what you give someone you can't buy, he said. Isabella took the flowers, her expression unreadable. A genuine apology would be a good start. I'm not good at apologies. I've noticed. I'm not good at most things that matter. Also noticed, but she kept the flowers, and that night she placed them in a vase by her window where the moonlight could touch them. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes that was enough to plant seeds. Another week passed. Richard found Isabella in the music room, running her fingers over the piano keys without pressing them. Play something, he said from the doorway. She shook her head. I've forgotten how. I don't believe that. Believe what you want. Some things get buried too deep to dig up. Richard crossed the room and sat beside her on the bench, the same way she had sat beside him months ago when he had played at 2 a.m. What if I help you remember? Isabella looked at him, searching his face for mockery or manipulation, but she found only earnestness, clumsy and uncertain, but real. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because I'm tired of living in silence. You chose silence, I know, and I'm choosing differently now. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play, the same melancholy melody from that night, the one that sounded like loneliness given form. Isabella listened. Then, slowly, she added her own notes, tentative at first, then stronger. Their melodies wove together, creating something neither could have made alone. When the song ended, neither moved. Isabella, Richard said quietly, I can't undo what I did. The lies, the manipulation. I can't give you back what I took. No, you can't. But I can try to give you something else. What? He finally looked at her. Truth. No more secrets, no more control, just honesty, even if it's ugly. Isabella studied his face. This man who had bought her life and was now trying to buy his way back into humanity. Truth is a good start, she said. But Richard, truth without change is just confession, and confession without repentance is worthless. Then tell me how to repent. You don't learn repentance. You live it. She stood and walked to the door, then paused. Keep trying, Richard. Maybe one day you'll figure out what it means to love something more than you fear losing it. And she left him alone at the piano, surrounded by echoes and the weight of words he was only beginning to understand. The contract had 18 months left, but Isabella couldn't survive 18 more days in a house built on lies, no matter how beautiful the cages had become. She had tried. God knows she had tried. She had watched Richard attempt to become human, had seen the cracks forming in his armor, had even felt her own walls beginning to soften despite everything. But every time she looked at him, she remembered. Their entire relationship was founded on manipulation. He hadn't chosen her. He had bought her. And love, real love, couldn't grow in soil poisoned from the start. She planned her departure carefully, waited until Richard traveled for business, a 3-day trip to New York, packed only what she had brought, a single suitcase of clothes, her mother's necklace, the books that were hers before they became his gifts. She left behind the designer dresses, the jewelry, the phone he had given her, left behind everything that smelled of his world. Daniel had arranged a small apartment across town. Basic, cheap, hers. The night before she was set to leave, Isabella walked through the estate one last time. She touched the piano where they had shared music, walked through the garden where he had shown her his mother's roses, stood in the library where she had spent countless hours hiding from the weight of her own choices, and she felt nothing, not hate, not even anger anymore, just emptiness. She had survived, but she hadn't lived, and she was so tired of surviving. She left the letter on his desk in an envelope with his name written in careful script. Inside, her words were simple. Richard, I've fulfilled my obligation. 18 months early, I know. But I think we both understand that staying would only prolong something that was never meant to exist. Your brother is free. Your company is secure. Your inheritance is yours. I was never meant to be more than a signature on paper, and I refuse to spend another day pretending otherwise. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you anymore. You did what you thought you had to do, and I did the same, but this marriage, this arrangement, it's killing whatever pieces of ourselves we have left. I'm leaving to reclaim what's mine. My life, my choices, my breath. Don't look for me. Let me go. It's the kindest thing you could do. Isabella P.S. Thank you for the books. They were the only gifts that felt honest. She left at dawn. The house was silent, the staff not yet awake. She walked down the driveway where she had first arrived as a bride and left as a prisoner freed by her own hand. Daniel was waiting in his car, engine running. You ready? He asked. Isabella looked back at the estate one last time, this monument to wealth and isolation. Yes, she said, I'm ready. They drove away as the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. New beginnings, the poets called it. Isabella called it survival. Richard returned from New York 2 days later. He walked through his house calling her name, already knowing she wouldn't answer, but unable to stop himself. Isabella, silence. Isabella, silence. He found the letter in his study, propped against a photo frame, the only picture they had ever taken together, a formal shot from the wedding, neither smiling. He read her words 3 times, then a 4th. Then he sat in his leather chair, surrounded by his empire of glass and steel, and let himself feel what he had spent a lifetime avoiding: loss. For the first time since his mother died, Richard Blake cried. Not quiet tears, not dignified grief. He sobbed like a man who had just realized he had everything except the one thing that mattered: her. Days became weeks. The house felt larger, emptier. Richard tried to work, but concentration failed him. He'd find himself in the music room, sitting at the piano, unable to play. He'd walk through the gardens and see her ghost among his mother's roses. He'd eat dinner alone at that massive table and remember the brief months when 2 ends didn't feel so far apart. His assistant asked if he wanted to file breach of contract. Richard fired him for suggesting it. Daniel received a check in the mail. $1 million, a note attached. She fulfilled her obligation. This fulfills mine. No demand for her return, no lawyers, no control, just acceptance. One night, 6 months after she left, Richard sat at his desk and wrote his own letter. He wrote it knowing she would never read it. But he wrote it anyway because some confessions need to exist even if they're never heard. Isabella, you were right about everything. I bought you. I controlled you. I built a prison and called it protection. I told myself it was just business, just necessity, just survival. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid that if I let anyone close enough to see the real me, they'd realize there's nothing there worth seeing. So I kept you at a distance, kept everyone at a distance. And now I'm alone in this house, and I realize I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. I'm afraid I never will be again. You asked me once what I wanted. I said silence. I was wrong. What I wanted was you. Not the version I tried to control. The real you. The one who fought me, challenged me, refused to be broken. The one who saw through all my walls and still sat beside me at a piano at 2 a.m. You taught me what it means to be human again. And I lost you because I learned too late. I hope you're happy, Isabella. I hope you're free. I hope you never think of me. But if you do, please know, I'm sorry. Richard. He folded the letter, placed it in his desk drawer, and locked it away. Some words weren't meant to be sent. They were just meant to be true. 7 years passed like pages in a book nobody read. Isabella rebuilt her life brick by careful brick. She worked as a volunteer nurse at a community clinic, helping people who couldn't afford proper health care. The work was hard, often heartbreaking, but it was hers. She lived in a small apartment with plants on the windowsill and books stacked in corners. Modest, simple, free. She dated occasionally. A teacher, a musician, a kind lawyer who reminded her nothing of Richard. But nothing stuck. Something inside her had changed during those years in the estate. She had learned to survive without love, and unlearning that lesson proved harder than she'd expected. Daniel worried about her. You're allowed to be happy, Isa. I am happy. You're content. That's not the same thing. Maybe he was right. But contentment felt safer than happiness. Happiness could be taken away. Richard Blake's empire continued to grow. He expanded into new markets, acquired competitors, built skyscrapers that touched clouds. But late at night, when the board meetings ended and the assistants went home, he sat alone in that same study where Isabella had confronted him 7 years ago. He never remarried, never dated, never even entertained the thought. People whispered about the cold billionaire who had everything except warmth. They didn't know he had once held warmth in his hands and crushed it through his own fear. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, aggressive, inoperable, terminal. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe 8, with treatment. Richard refused chemotherapy. What's the point? He asked his physician. To buy a few more months of this? Of life, Mr. Blake? This isn't life. It's just existence. He settled his affairs with the same efficiency he had built his empire, coldly, methodically, without sentiment. He donated most of his fortune to charities, hospitals, schools, organizations that helped people like Isabella had helped people. He sold the estate, too many ghosts. He moved into a modest penthouse downtown and hired a nursing service to help manage his final months. We'll send our best palliative care specialist, the agency promised. Richard didn't care who they sent. Death was coming regardless. Isabella received the call on a Tuesday morning. Ms. Costa, this is Henderson Care Services. We have an assignment for you. I already have a full schedule. This is a special case. VIP client. Terminal diagnosis. 6-figure compensation. Isabella paused. She didn't need the money, but 6 figures could fund the clinic for a year. What's the condition? Pancreatic cancer. End stage. Client has refused aggressive treatment. Needs palliative care, pain management, and companionship. I'm a nurse, not a companion. The client specifically requested someone who would treat him like a person, not a bank account. Something in that phrase made her pause. What's the client's name? Richard Blake. The phone nearly slipped from her hands. Ms. Costa, are you there? 7 years. 7 years of distance and healing and carefully built walls. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. But something else, something she couldn't name, whispered, "Go. When does he need someone?" Immediately. This week, if possible. Isabella closed her eyes, took a breath, made a choice. I'll do it. She arrived at his penthouse on a grey afternoon when the city looked like it was holding its breath. The building was modern, expensive, everything Richard Blake had always been. She rode the elevator to the top floor, her heart hammering in a way she couldn't control. A housekeeper opened the door. A kind-faced woman who looked relieved to see her. He's in the bedroom, hasn't eaten today. Barely sleeps. Won't talk to most people. She hesitated. He's difficult. I know, Isabella said quietly. The bedroom was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. Richard lay in bed, thinner than she remembered, his once powerful frame reduced to sharp angles and pale skin. But his eyes, those frozen lake eyes, were the same. They widened when he saw her. Isabella. His voice was hoarse, broken by pain and disbelief. She stood in the doorway, professional mask in place, though her hands trembled. Hello, Richard. Why are you here? I'm your nurse. The agency sent me. He tried to sit up, winced, fell back against the pillows. No, you can't. I didn't ask for you specifically. I didn't know. I know. It's coincidence, fate, whatever you want to call it. You should leave. Probably. I mean it. So do I. She moved into the room, setting down her medical bag with practiced efficiency. But I'm here now and you need help, and I'm very good at my job. Richard stared at her, something between anguish and hope flickering in his eyes. I can't ask this of you. You're not asking, I'm choosing. Why? Isabella met his gaze. I don't know yet. Maybe because 7 years ago you gave me back my life. Maybe because I'm curious if you ever learned what I told you. What did you tell me? That repentance isn't something you learn. It's something you live. Richard's eyes filled with tears he was too weak to hide. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I know, she said quietly. I can see it. She moved to the window and opened the curtains, letting light flood the room. Richard squinted against the brightness but didn't protest. Let's start with the basics, Isabella said, her voice gentle but firm. When did you last eat? I don't remember. When did you last take your pain medication? This morning, maybe. Then we have work to do. She spent the next hour assessing him, taking vitals, checking his medication schedule, making notes about his condition. Richard watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. Finally, he spoke. You came back. Isabella paused, syringe in hand. I didn't come back, Richard. Fate brought me here. There's a difference, is there? Yes. Coming back implies I wanted to. This, she gestured vaguely. This is just the universe having a twisted sense of humor. Or justice. She looked at him. What do you mean? I spent 7 years trying to forget you. And now you're here, in my final months, taking care of me. He laughed, bitter and broken. If that's not cosmic justice, I don't know what is. Justice would be me refusing to help you. So why didn't you? Isabella prepared the injection, her voice soft. Because I'm not interested in justice anymore, Richard. I'm interested in peace, and maybe helping you die with dignity will give me that. She administered the medication with gentle hands. Richard closed his eyes, but she saw a tear slip down his cheek. I don't deserve your kindness, he whispered. Probably not, she agreed. But I'm giving it anyway. Why? Because that's what makes me different from who you used to be. The words hung in the air between them, not cruel, just true. And in that truth, something began to shift. Not love, not yet, but something softer. Something like the first thaw after a long winter. Days turned into weeks. Isabella came every morning at 8, stayed until evening, managed Richard's care with professional precision and unexpected tenderness. She cooked meals he could barely eat, read him books when pain kept him awake, sat beside his bed during the worst nights, holding his hand through waves of agony that morphed him into someone unrecognizable. They didn't talk about the past at first. The silence was easier, safer. But silence, Isabella had learned, was just delayed conversation. One afternoon, Richard was lucid enough to ask, "How's Daniel?" Isabella looked up from the medication she was organizing. "He's good. Married now, 2 kids, works as a financial consultant. He's happy." "Yes, very." Richard nodded slowly. I'm glad something good came from all that. Something good. Richard, you framed him. You destroyed his life to manipulate mine. I know. And he still ended up happy. You both did. He gestured weakly at himself. Cosmic justice indeed. Isabella set down the pills. You think suffering makes up for what you did, doesn't it? No. Suffering is just suffering. It doesn't erase anything. Then what does? She considered the question. I don't know if anything does. Maybe some things are just permanent scars we learn to live with. Richard closed his eyes. I've lived with scars my whole life. I thought I'd gotten used to them. But these last 7 years, the scar you left was different. How? It reminded me I was human, that I could feel, that I had lost something real. He opened his eyes, looking directly at her. I thought control would protect me from pain. Instead, it guaranteed I'd die alone. You're not alone now. Only because fate has a cruel sense of humor. or because some stories need proper endings. Another week passed. Richard's condition worsened. The cancer was aggressive, stealing pieces of him daily. One night, when pain carved him hollow, he called out for Isabella, even though she was right there. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "I'm right here." "Don't leave," he whispered, delirious. "Please don't leave again. I'm not going anywhere. You left before. You were right to leave. But it killed me. It killed me every day." Isabella's throat tightened. "Richard, I never told you. Never could say it. But I loved you. God help me, I loved you. And I destroyed it because I didn't know how to hold something without crushing it." The words hit her like a physical blow. She had suspected, maybe known. But hearing it spoken, raw and desperate and true, changed everything. "Richard, you didn't love me. You loved the idea of control." "No." His grip tightened on her hand. "No. I used control to hide from love. There's a difference, and I've had 7 years to understand it." Tears burned in Isabella's eyes. "Then why didn't you come find me? Why didn't you try?" "Because you deserved better than another man taking your choices away, even if my choice was to give you freedom." She sat there, holding the hand of the man who had imprisoned her, and freed her and loved her in the only broken way he knew how, and she realized forgiveness wasn't about what he deserved. It was about what she needed. The next morning Richard was sleeping when Isabella arrived. She found a letter on the nightstand addressed to her. Her hands shook as she opened it. "Isabella, I'm writing this during a clear moment because I don't know how many I have left. I need you to understand something. Everything I did to you was wrong. The manipulation, the control, the lies. I can't apologize enough for stealing 2 years of your life. But I need you to know that those 2 years changed me. You showed me what strength looked like. Real strength. Not the corporate, ruthless kind I'd always practiced, but the quiet, persistent strength of someone who survives without becoming cruel. You could have hated me. Should have hated me. Instead, you tried to make music with me. You tried to plant gardens in my mother's soil. You tried to teach me how to be human. I was too broken to learn then, but I learned after. In the 7 years without you, I learned every lesson you tried to teach. I learned that control is just fear in expensive clothing. I learned that love means letting go. I learned that the person I hurt most was the person I should have cherished. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know, you were not a transaction. You were not a solution. You were the only real thing in my life, and I destroyed it because I was too cowardly to admit I needed you more than you needed me. If there's an afterlife, I hope I meet you there with clean hands. Until then, thank you for the music, for the attempt, for coming back even when you had every reason not to, for showing me what it means to be human right before I stopped being anything at all. I love you. I think I always did. I just didn't have the language." Richard Isabella read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in her bag, and sat beside his bed. When Richard woke hours later, she was still there. "You read it," he said, "not a question." "Yes." "And?" She took his hand. "And I understand now." "Understand what?" "Why I came back. Not for revenge. Not even for closure. But because love, real love, doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient or painful or built on a cracked foundation." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to love me, Isabella. You don't owe me that. I know, but here's what I've learned in 7 years. Love isn't about debt. It's about choice, and I'm choosing to acknowledge that what we had, broken and twisted as it was, mattered. Mattered. Yes, you hurt me, but you also changed me, made me stronger, taught me what I wouldn't accept, and in the end you let me go." She squeezed his hand. "That took courage, the kind you didn't have when we started. I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of it. For every moment I made you feel like property instead of a person. I know you are. I can see it in every breath you take. Can you forgive me?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm not God, Richard. I can't absolve you, but I can understand you. And understanding, sir, that's halfway to forgiveness." Richard closed his eyes, and for the first time in months his face looked peaceful. "That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what I can give." She stayed beside him as afternoon turned to evening, holding the hand of the man who had bought her wedding and lost everything trying to keep what couldn't be owned. And in that quiet room, something old finally died, so something new could begin. Not love, not anymore, but grace. And grace, Isabella thought, was its own kind of miracle. Richard's final weeks arrived like autumn, inevitable, beautiful in its melancholy, and far too quick. His body failed in increments, First his strength, then his appetite, finally his clarity. But in those last lucid moments, he became someone Isabella had never met. Vulnerable, grateful, achingly human. They talked about everything they should have discussed 7 years ago. His childhood, her dreams, the music they both loved, the gardens his mother planted, the father who broke her. "He taught me that love was weakness," Richard said one afternoon, his voice barely a whisper. "That caring about someone gave them power to destroy you. And you believed him. Until I met you, then I realized he was right. You had the power to destroy me. And you did." He smiled weakly, but not by being cruel, by being kind, by showing me what I could have been if I hadn't been so afraid. Isabella adjusted his pillows. "You weren't all bad, Richard. Broken, yes, but not evil. Evil is just broken people with power. No, evil is broken people who refuse to heal. You tried. Late, but you tried." One evening Daniel came to visit. Richard hadn't asked to see him, but Isabella arranged it anyway. "He needs to know you're okay," she told Daniel, "that he didn't ruin you permanently." "Why should I give him that peace?" "Because holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it." Daniel reluctantly agreed. The meeting was brief, awkward, heavy with history. Richard looked at the man whose life he had manipulated and said simply, "I'm sorry, it's not enough." "But it's true." Daniel stared at him. This powerful man reduced to bones and regret. Finally he nodded. "I forgive you. Not for you. For me, because I'm tired of carrying this." "Your sister is extraordinary," Richard said. "You know that, right? She's the strongest person I've ever met." "I know, she raised me after our parents died, taught me everything worth knowing. She tried to teach me too. I just didn't listen until it was too late." They shook hands, not warmly, but genuinely. When Daniel left, he pulled Isabella aside. "Are you okay being here with him?" "I think so. It's strange, but necessary." "You still love him, don't you?" Isabella hesitated. "I love who he became, who he could have been. But the man who hurt me? No. That man died years ago." "Good," Daniel said, "because you deserve better than martyrdom." "I'm not being a martyr. I'm just finishing a story that started badly, but deserves a better ending." Richard's last night arrived on a Thursday. Isabella felt it in her bones. The shift in his breathing, the distant look in his eyes, the way his body seemed to be releasing its grip on life. She called hospice, made him comfortable, dimmed the lights. Then she sat beside him and took his hand. "Richard, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open. "Isabella, I'm here. Stay." His voice was barely audible. "Don't want to die alone. I'm not going anywhere." He tried to smile. "Liar. You said that before, then left." "I left because I had to survive. I'm staying now because you should know what it feels like to be cared for at the end." Tears rolled down his temples. "Don't deserve your kindness. You've said that. Multiple times. It's getting repetitive." He managed a weak laugh, coughed, grimaced. "Still sharp. Someone has to be. You're too busy dying to argue back." "Isabella." "Yes? Can I ask something?" "Anything." His grip tightened on her hand. "Can you forgive me? Really forgive me, not understand, not halfway, actually forgive." She looked at this man, this broken, repentant, dying man, and felt something shift in her chest. 7 years of anger, 7 years of walls, 7 years of trying to forget what it felt like to sit beside someone at 2 a.m. and share music that had no words. "I forgive you, Richard," she said quietly. "Not because you earned it, but because carrying unforgiveness is heavier than the original hurt." "Thank you." More tears. "Thank you. But Richard, I need you to forgive yourself too, because dying with guilt won't undo anything. It'll just waste whatever time you have left." "Don't know. How?" "Then learn. You have hours. Make them count." She leaned closer. "You were a terrible husband. A manipulative man. Someone who hurt people because you were hurt first." He flinched. "But," she continued, "you also became someone who tried, who changed, who learned that love means letting go. And that matters. In the end, that's what I'll remember." Richard's breathing grew shallower. "Will you play something?" "Piano." He nodded weakly. Isabella looked around. "Richard, there's no piano here. Pretend. Hum it. Just need to hear music. One last time." She understood. She began to hum the melody he had played that night, the one about loneliness and longing and hope dying slowly. But as she hummed, she changed it, added notes, made it softer, turned the tragedy into something that almost sounded like peace. Richard closed his eyes, listening. His breathing slowed, became irregular. Then, with Isabella's hand in his and her voice filling the quiet room, Richard Blake took his last breath. Not alone, not unloved, but forgiven. Isabella sat with him for an hour after he was gone, still holding his hand, still humming softly. When the hospice workers came, she kissed his forehead, the first and last kiss she would ever give him. "Rest now," she whispered. "You finally learned what it means to love more than you feared losing." She gathered her things, took the letter he had written her, and walked out of the penthouse into the early morning light. She didn't cry. She had done all her crying years ago. Now she just felt empty, but clean, like a wound finally closed. 3 years passed. Isabella continued her work at the clinic, saving money to open her own community health center. Daniel's children called her Aunt Isa and drew her pictures of flowers and sunshine. Life moved forward the way life does, one quiet day after another. But some Thursdays, when the light hit a certain way, Isabella thought about Richard, not with pain, not even with regret, just with acknowledgement that he had been part of her story, painful, complicated, necessary. One autumn afternoon, she received a letter from Richard's estate lawyer. Inside was a key and a note. "Ms. Costa, per Mr. Blake's will. You are the sole beneficiary of his estate. He liquidated most assets and donated them to charity. However, he left specific items for you with the instruction that they be delivered 3 years after his death. The key is to a storage unit. The address is enclosed. He wanted you to know, these are the things that mattered. I thought you should have them." Isabella sat with the key for a week before using it. Finally, on a grey Saturday, she drove to the storage facility and opened the unit. Inside, the piano from the estate, the one where they had made music at 2 a.m., his mother's journals, decades of thoughts, poems, garden designs, photos of Isabella she didn't know existed, candid shots from their marriage, her reading, tending roses, laughing with staff. In every photo she looked trapped, beautiful, but trapped, and a final envelope, thick and sealed with red wax. She opened it with trembling hands. "Isabella, if you're reading this, I've been gone 3 years. I asked the lawyer to wait because I wanted you to have space to heal before dealing with my ghosts. The piano is yours. You made it sing in ways I never could. My mother's journals are yours. She would have loved you. You're everything she hoped I would find. The photos, I took them because I was trying to understand how someone could be so beautiful while so unhappy. It took me too long to realize I was the reason. I've established a foundation in your name, $50 million. Use it however you want. Build your clinic. Help people the way you tried to help me. This isn't payment. You can't pay for forgiveness. It's just legacy. The only good thing I can leave behind is the chance for you to do more good. You told me once that I needed to learn repentance by living it. I tried, Isabella. I tried. I hope, wherever you are, you're happy. I hope you found someone who loves you the way I should have from the beginning. I hope you think of me occasionally and don't feel pain. Thank you for showing me what it means to be human. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for forgiving me, even when I didn't deserve it. I love you, I always did. I just didn't have the language until you taught me. Goodbye, Isabella. Richard P.S. The last page of my mother's journal has a garden design she never finished. Maybe you could finish it for her, for us, for whatever love we managed to create in the wreckage. Isabella sat in the storage unit surrounded by the remnants of a complicated love and cried. Not from sadness, not from anger, but from relief. The story was finally over, and she was free. 5 years later, the Isabella Costa Community Health and Wellness Center opened its doors. In the back there was a garden, designed from old journal sketches, filled with roses and white lilies and music from speakers hidden among the flowers. A small plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of Richard Blake, who learned too late that love is not control, but release." Visitors often asked Isabella about him. She would smile, soft, sad, but genuine, and say, "He was someone who made terrible mistakes and spent his last days trying to become better. That's all any of us can do, really." And on quiet evenings, when the clinic closed and the sun painted the sky in shades of gold, Isabella would sit at the piano Richard had left her and play the melody they had shared. She would think about the man who had bought her wedding, the man who had imprisoned her, the man who had in the end set her free. And she would whisper into the music, "I forgive you, Richard. Completely. Finally, I forgive you." The wind would carry her words away. The flowers would sway. And somewhere in whatever came after, She hoped he heard, not because he deserved peace, but because forgiveness was never about what the other person deserved. It was about releasing the weight you carried so you could finally breathe. Fade to black text on screen. Some loves are born from passion, others from pain. But the ones that transform us are the ones that teach us to forgive. Not because forgetting is possible, but because carrying anger is heavier than the original wound. This is a story about two people who found each other in the worst way and learned too late what love actually means. It's not control. It's not possession. It's not even happiness. Love is the courage to let go, the strength to forgive, and the wisdom to know that some people come into our lives not to stay, but to teach us who we're meant to become.